Hi, I'm Andrew,
Hi, I'm Luke.
and this is Australia's economic outlook for 2021 and beyond. So, a little introduction about the Australian economy. The Australian dollar, or AUD, is worth 77 cents to one US dollar as of January 20th, 2020. As you can see on the right, the Australian GDP has been experiencing relatively stable growth over the past 20 years, and it is ranked the world's 14th largest economy at $1.38 trillion, and also is ranked 11th for GDP per capita, sitting around $56,000 per person. Both of those metrics are in US dollars. Also, most of the GDP generated within the country comes from the service sector, which is 70%, and 75% of the population is also employed by the service sector. So you can imagine how much COVID impacted the Australian economy, as those jobs were not able to operate during pandemic restrictions. Also, prior to COVID, the Australian economy was experiencing relatively low employment rates for years, never exceeding 6.5%, but usually sitting around at 5.5%, which is a pretty stable and healthy rate. Also, impressively, Australia had not experienced a recession since 1991. And then just a little bit more about the GDP. So, like I said before, 70% is generated by the service sector, 4% in the agriculture, and then 26% industrial. And also, a large portion of their GDP is generated from exporting their vast and numerous natural resources, mainly to China and Japan, both of which have been growing rapidly over the past 20 years, which has also very much benefited Australia, as China and Japan are hungry for their industrial sectors are hungry for natural resources, and Australia is happy to oblige and provide those. Also, their GDP is consistently growing as the Australian government makes it so employers put 9.5% of the employees' annual salary into a retirement fund that they can access when they're 55. And this makes it so they can continue spending even in their later years. They have a very healthy sum of money when they retire. And it also makes it so the Australian government can not put as much money into Social Security and use it to put money back into the economy with stimulus bills or buying bonds, such.
Employment analysis. As of November 2020, the unemployment and participation rates in Australia stand at 6.8% and 66.1%, respectively. Both of these rates are considered relatively low by first world standards. Historically, Australia has had a low unemployment rate, having not rose above 6.5% for an impressive 19-year stretch between 2001 and 2020. This is a result of not having experienced a recession since 1991. I feel that it's important to talk about why Australia hasn't had a recession in so long. Australia has been able to avoid a recession because of quick and effective fiscal policy, a rich supply of natural resources, and increasing exports to China and Japan. It is important to note that a steady flow of immigration has also impacted the workforce and economy heavily. I'd like to note that they really held back the 2008 financial crisis through their fiscal policy, and we're very good on that. Employment in depth. Focusing further on employment, Australia's most dominant sectors are healthcare and social assistance, retail trade, and education and training. The industry sector employment chart goes into more detail on the spread of employment between sectors, focusing on capital cities versus Australia as a whole. The sectors with the largest changes in jobs are as follows. Manufacturing decreased, education and training increased, wholesale trade decreased, and healthcare and social assistance increased. This last sector size was likely impacted heavily by the pandemic. Australia has maintained relatively low differences of approximately 6% in unemployment between youth and total population, as seen on the graph in the lower right. A similar gap of percent is seen when comparing unemployment rates of those with college degrees and those without a high school diploma.
And then price analysis of Australia. So Australia's cost of living is around 17% higher than US's. But one thing to note about that metric is the standard of living in Australia is also significantly higher than the US. Over the past 10 years, the CPI of Australia has risen around 23%, but wages have also increased about 30%. So it's not as big of a change as you may think. To the right, you can see the quarterly CPI change of Australia. You can see it kind of took a dip due to COVID, but other than that, it's been relatively steadily increasing. The cost of everyday goods in Australia is much higher than most other countries, as a lot has to be imported, as they are an island, and they have to use boats and planes to get those, not just trucks. Utilities are also relatively high in Australia, and electric prices spike significantly in the summer, as most Australian homes need AC as it gets incredibly hot. Overall, the cost of living in Australia has risen and will most likely rise, but wages are increasing at a steady rate as well. So it's not too large of a problem as long as both of those metrics grow steadily. Their inflation goal, set by the ABS, is usually 2 to 3% and has been hit consistently for the past 10 to 15 years, as it is a very stable economy.
How COVID affected the economy. Similarly to other first world nations, Australia suffered increased unemployment from COVID-19, spiking at 7.5%. This large spike is seen in the graph on the top right and is clearly very different from all other years. CPI fell 2% and GDP fell as well. This is likely due to Australia's large service sector, which was unable to operate during the pandemic. Although Australia was clearly hit hard by the pandemic, it is slowly rebounding, with unemployment decreasing, CPI rising, and inflation being roughly 1.6%. COVID response. In response to COVID, all of Australia went under strict lockdown, the longest in the world, in fact, 112 days. Other measures include the government delivering a $17.6 billion economic support package to help keep people in jobs and encourage investment, a $2.4 billion health package to help all Australians, 30 billion in tax concessions to businesses, and 18 billion in tax income cuts, as well as a slew of other support packages and COVID information PSAs. We will go further into what will happen because Australia spent all this money to support the economy when we look at monetary policy.
And then another headline to note is the China Australia relationship. So, like I noted before, China receives 30% of all Australia's exports and is a major factor in their GDP. And then it's mutually beneficial, like I said, as China is very hungry for natural resources with their rapid industrialization, and Australia has a large stores of them that they can easily supply to China, as they are not too geographically far apart. But it has become strained quite recently, as Chinese tech firms have been accused of spying on Australian citizens, and Australia, in response, has banned many of these technologies and softwares from the country. And China responded with removing Australian officials and academics from the country and sending them back to Australia with no notice. And then in response as well, Beijing has many of their industrial plants have banned importing Australian coal, which is a major export for Australia, and that is also discriminatory in a trade act. Both China and Australia have signed, and many other first world countries have signed as well. And tension is continuing to build, as Australia is also calling out humanity crimes for the Uyghur Muslim persecution in China, and this is only making the Chinese government more angry. And there's no real clear ending to this mess, but their relationship is very much symbiotic. So I doubt the relationship will end completely, and they will most likely find a resolution, as they both need each other for each other's economies to function at full capacity. And then also I'm going to highlight fiscal policy. So on the right, you can see a graph of how Australian fiscal policy is broken down. You can also, one thing to note is also 2019, 2020, and 2021 projections. The light orange is how much fiscal policy or how much money they're dumping in fiscal policy into economic response to COVID, which is light orange. It's a pretty significant number. And Australia is the world's fourth freest economy, and it has been a leader in this regard ever since the metric started being noted in 1984. They have a bracketed tax code with the bottom paying no taxes and the top paying a fee of $58,000 and then 45% on all excesses over 180K. And all of their brackets are like this as they pay a standard like fee, like I believe it's 558K to 180K. If you're in that tax bracket, you pay $35,000 base and then 45% on anything over 56K. The corporate tax rate is also 30% in the Australian economy, and minimum wage, as they are paid weekly, is $753.80 per week, or for 38 hours, or $19.84. Those are in AUD. And then most dollars are actually spent on their welfare systems and universal health care. And 70% of all money put into welfare actually goes to helping their elderly class.
Monetary policy. Before I begin talking about monetary policy, it's important to note that the central bank in Australia is the Reserve Bank of Australia. Concerning national debt in Australia, the country had negligible debt in comparison to other first world nations for an extended period of time. In 2013, their net to GDP ratio stood at 10.4%. This changed dramatically over the last decade as a result of raising money for deficit spending. In 2019, their national debt peaked at $392.3 billion. The Australian Treasury forecasts that the 2020-2021 debt position will be $700.3 billion, a net to GDP ratio of 36.1%. Accompanied by this issue, Australia is facing the rapid growth of government bonds. Over the past 9 years, the Reserve Bank of Australia has continuously cut interest rates, moving from a cash rate target of 4.5% in 2011 to a current cash rate of 0.1%, the lowest in Australian history. As a result, they currently face a liquidity trap, similar to many other first world nations. With such low interest rates, the effect of monetary policy in Australia will be severely limited for the next few years. However, there is little Australia can do. It is not following the global trend of unprecedented low interest rates would only hurt domestic producers. Neighboring countries. Although Australia is an island, they have maintained status as a major player in the oceanic economy for a long time. China is by far their largest trade partner and semi-rival. Yet, China has now far surpassed Australia as a result of rapid industrialization and an incredible population boom. Australia's strained relationship with China has resulted in increased trade with Japan, who has become a growing consumer of Australian natural resources.
The outlook for the Australian economy, like most Western or first world countries, is negative. But on a global scale, I would say it's neutral. As interest rates are continuing to dip and are at 0.1%, it is in very much a danger of liquidity trap, but most first world countries are. They are also in danger of losing one of their largest trade partners, China, but the relationship is symbiotic, so everything is pointing to them repairing the relationship. National debt is also on the rise after years of unprecedented lows, and they will most likely just continue their heavy taxes and tax the rich higher to make up or more to make up some of this debt. And they've also handled their COVID response incredibly well and have supported businesses whenever possible to dampen the effects of COVID on the economy. So overall, I believe it is not exactly a great economy to invest in at the moment, but it's certainly relatively stable, and I would say it's neutral on a grand scale. Then here are our sources. And thanks for tuning in. I hope you learned something about the Australian economy.